What will come to your mind when you hear the word spice? People would think of various spices such as peppers, paprika, chili powder, and oregano, to name a few. In this video, let's talk about Alialia petiolata, which is said to be the oldest spice in the world among many spices. 6,000 years ago in Europe, at the time, new civilization and cultures began to form. A pottery made just around the time was excavated recently, and when scientists analyzed the fragments of the pottery, they found a trace of this spice called Alialia petiolata. Alialia petiolata is a flowering plant which is also known as a garlic mustard. You might think that this plant shares similarities with the garlic by its name, but as you can see, it's a completely different plant. However, this Alialia petiolata flower is ground. It gives off a garlic-like fragrance and it is actually still favored as a spice in some areas even today. Alright, going back to the pottery excavation, they found that there was a traces of fish, venison and more, which was a serious finding showing that Alialia petiolata were used in the cooking. Traces of spices have been discovered for some time, but it was first time that there was a clear link between food and spice, which means it shows a clear evidence that since more than 6,000 years ago, people are using spices for their dishes. 1,000 years later, at the site of the construction of the pyramids in ancient Egypt, workers were forced to eat a large amount of garlic as a toning purpose, and in Chinese Han Dynasty, cloves were used to take a cleanse the bread of court ceremonies. If you take a look at the history how spices were used, spices were considered as a great thing that has good effect on humans. And time flies by around 100 BC, the trade of spices on the Orient countries flourished around that time, and the momentum affected the Middle East. But because the traders kept their spices as a secret to the Middle East, since they don't want them to know how great the spices are, as a result, spices were kept secret and really hard to obtain. And then people in the Middle East started to refer the spice as the phantom. Various spices are transported from their origin, which is eastern country, to Europe via long routes. If it go through many merchants and intermediaries during that time, the price will inevitably rises. By the time it arrived in Europe, it was worth as gold and silver, and it was treated as treasure for Europeans. At the time, there was a book of Marco Polo's story named The Travel of Marco Polo, which is the only book that has information about the Marco Polo experience with his travels, including the information of spices, and it tickled the ambitions of adventurers. With this book, the Western people are more interested with the Eastern countries, and here comes the age of discovery. And there was a man called Columbus, an adventurer that sought a spice of treasure in India, the Moroccan island, and the ground of Japan. They challenged the westward route that no one has challenged before. Because at this time, the flat earth theory and the round earth theory were uncertain, and the people thought that they would fall from the edge of the earth to the abyss if they proceed too far to the west. Having with this doubt, Columbus seriously considered it with the experts such as Martin Behem, the creator of the oldest globe, and they confirmed the success of the westward opening. After Columbus knowing that they can proceed to the adventure, he persuaded his neighbor queen, Isabel, to row into the Atlantic Ocean in August 1492, and 2 months later in October, they arrived in the San Salvador Islands of the Bahamas. Columbus is convinced that the island is a golden country, when the natives of the island wear a gold ring on their noses, but unfortunately, he couldn't find a silk and a pure gold written on the travels of the Marco Polo. The only thing Columbus gets in the treasure is a slave. Aboriginal people of Bahamas had a little idea of ownership of property and materials. Columbus left the world become a great slave to the natives, who never had the concept of enemies in the first place, and no enemy to seize things ever had appeared. A few months later, he returned to Portugal in March 1943. After that, the port of the Barros in Spain, she welcomed by Princess Isabel, and they were able to make a history of discovering the New World. However, there were many outrageous events behind the scene. In order to colonize the island that was discovered, the slaughter of the native Indians, and the purpose of the slaughter became the main rather than finding the gold. Because of that, Columbus' honor falls to the ground day by day, and he was forgotten by the people, and he passed away in 1506. Meanwhile in Portugal, João I, who was also called the Great King at the time, pushed to open a new way to the sea to develop a trade in, and his son hoped for the sea so much that he was called the Nautical Prince. Prince Enrique, who was called the Nautical Prince, was attracted by the broken coast written in the travels of Marco Polo and tried to find the treasure trove of the spices at the end of the sea. His diplomatic work was extremely busy and he completed his life. It was Vasco da Gama who inherited the intention of the Enrique Voyage Prince. Educated in the Portuguese court, he quickly became a well-known ship navigating officer. Around the end of the Columbus' second trans-Pacific journey, Vasco da Gama found a new route to reach the India by cruising the Cape of Good Hope. And finally, he arrived at a broken beach, packed the spices into the hold, and succeeded in bringing it back home. And this was an outrageous revolution for Europe. Until now, it takes a lot of time, money, to finally export the spice to the Europe via Arabia and Venice. But with the new route found by the Vasco da Gama, they were able to directly trade without going through other countries and cities. With this, no one can stop the advance of Portugal into the ocean. With the emergence of the Ministry of Trade, which makes a great deal of profit from trading, many explorers have tried to explore the unknown world of the ocean. Among them, Magellan, who was also famous as to be appeared in the textbook today, died in the battle while traveling. But it is said to be that his fleet has reached the first round in the world. In this way, the European societies and economies will undergo major changes throughout the Age of Discovery. But the plague that began in the 14th century began to cause a panic among the people. Due to the epidemic, a male doctor in the monastery who was in charge of medical treatment in the town was mobilized to treat the plague. But not all the towns and the villagers had a medical doctor, which they could not have a proper medical treatment for farmers and ordinary people living in the countryside. Herbs, which are one of the spices, played an active at the time. Many midwives in the city that at the time had a lot of knowledge about herbs, and they used the herbs to make a simple medicine to treat plague patients. However, their medical care was a hindrance to clergy who went up to the monastery and became doctors. All human life and death must be priests who serve God. The priests who have been taught that way have managed to get rid of the woman who used the herb so as they not to hurt their pride and technique. That caused witch hunting. Midwives were made into a witch who was very knowledgeable about herbs and was subjected to cruel persecution. And of course, not only this herbal remedy was the one of causing witch hunting, but the various causes were intertwined and caused the tragic witch hunting. Thus, herbal remedies have become taboo in Europe, but spices as seasonings have only been consumed day by day. Up until now, people used to think that the spices are high-ranking items or favorite items for the millionaire. But by the 16th century, spices had become widespread and become more and more common item in the household. However, as the consumption of the spices has increased in the proportion of the development of the food culture, European countries are competing for spices, and the spice war breaks out. Spain, Portugal, England, and the Netherlands, they participated in the spice war. They were the four major participants of the spice war fighting across India, which is a treasure trove of the spices. The Netherlands won the spice war at the end, dominating the strait, and the Netherlands succeeded on monopolizing many spices and their production areas. So, everyone thought that the Netherlands had monopolized the spices and prospered forever, until it isn't anymore. Surprisingly, the spice monopoly will come to the end. It was France that broke the monopoly. The France didn't get into the Dutch spices. They stole spices saplings and transplanted into their land of colonized land. Seeing the technique, Britain stole spice saplings and planted them with the same method, and the cultivated area spread to various places. Then there are no need to stick with the original spices before, and the spice war came to an end since they don't have to buy it anymore, but to plant their own spices. Also, the herbal remedy that was buried in the darkness by witch hunting became less restrictive in the second half of the 16th century, and herbal therapies licensed by the king and the pharmacists who combined it with the Oriental Chinese medicine appeared, and became an important medical science. Today, we talk about the spices that we see every day in our foods or kitchen, just everywhere. And just remember that the spices we used to see today was a source of war. That was hundreds of years ago. That's the end of the video. If you find the video interesting, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.